you gather the checks here?
I'm not doing it today.
I can read first.
Yeah, that's the one that I got.
Morning, Les. How you doing? Is this, seem like this is on? No? Hello, hello? Oh, yeah, Pastor Schultz always bends the microphone a little bit. How about now? Picking up? Okay, good. Well, morning everybody, good to see you again. I had a nice time in Coeur d'Alene, but it's good to be here too. How did it go with Pastor Schultz? What did you guys end up doing for Bible study? He said he'd have something.
We have a sheet of Bible study on Holy Spirit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good. And then, by the way, do you want to continue with Bible study in the summer? We can. I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. Maybe we won't July 4th weekend when the elders lead service, but yeah. But we'll have Pastor Lambert here, and then we'll have a vicar here. I was planning to have the vicar or a pastoral intern who leads the service. Maybe he could just do a Q&A, something about seminary. Just for a week. He's gonna, that would be fun. That would be nice. But just for 1 week to fill in when I'm not here. I don't know if anybody, maybe you'd rather not give input right on the spot. But let me know. I mean, it's not hard to have Bible study. It's not like it's, I'm doing something else, at that hour. Sundays, a lot of churches traditionally don't have it in the summer. And I can kind of see that, but then again, there's no reason not to, really. So maybe we could cancel for 1 or 2 weeks when I'm gone and the elders are filling in Sunday, but we could keep going all summer. Yeah. Okay. Right, yeah. So no Sunday school to give the teachers a break mostly, but any thoughts? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Seems fine to me. I mean, and we may briefly have use of the basement this summer too. That would be nice. We can have church down there before we get kicked out again. So we can, or Sunday school down there. Anyway, let me know if you have feedback. But I guess I'm inclined to do it. But if people are not, I've never really understood why we don't take church off. You know what I mean? Why take Sunday school off? And of all the times to sleep in, I would think summer is the least important because there's so much light, you're ready to get up early. But so we'll probably just keep going with, like I said, a couple weeks off in the middle of the summer. That way we can finish Hebrews and move on to something else. We could kind of do a change of pace, do something more casual, especially once we get into the basement. But we'll see. So for today, though, we're on to the book of Hebrews, and I think that we left off at Hebrews 4:14. I forgot to write it down, and because it's been 2 weeks, now I'm starting to second-guess myself, but I kind of think that's where... Or did we stop at 5 at the warning against falling away? And we picked up at 6. I remember going through this, but I can't remember if that was just me preparing it or that was us talking about it. But I think I remember the last thing we talked about was Hebrews 4, verses 12 through 13, where he says, "For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow, It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give an account. Does it seem like that's where we stopped? It seems like it to me. Okay, so now we're going to go on and talk about Jesus as the great high priest. Now, several people here are in the Tuesday morning Bible study. So we've been going through Exodus. We've been talking about the high priest. What do we know about the high priest in ancient Israel? We got to put ourselves into the mindset of this audience here. And they were very, very familiar with the high priest. Oh.
Before or after the Ten Commandments, in time of Leviticus?
Well, and I suppose really it gets into it more in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, but we talked in Exodus. It already talks about the sacrificial system and the place where the high priest could go. What were you thinking, Dave? Yeah, he was the mediator between the people and God. He represented them whenever he went into the special place. So the most holy place, it's where God dwelled. It's where the Ark of the Covenant was set. And there, once a year, behind the curtain, the high priest could go before God. And when he went there, he wore this special clothing. That's kind of what I was thinking of. He had the names of the 12 tribes written on a breastplate and written on some stones on his, holding his ephod together. He had on his turban, holy to the Lord, and so he represented the holy people of Israel before the Lord. So he was like their intermediary. They couldn't all go into the temple. They couldn't all go into the holy place and be in God's presence, but he went before and he represented them before God. So that is what the great high priest, or the high priest, would do. He would offer sacrifices, the most important sacrifices, on the Day of Atonement. He would purify. He didn't do all the sacrifices. That would be very difficult. But he did the most solemn and sacred sacrifices on behalf of the whole people. So yeah, he represented the people making sacrifices. And of course, he's going to connect that now to Jesus. And before we read this next section, we should look at the two Psalms that are going to be quoted. So let's turn first to Psalm 2. This is one of the most important Psalms, and it, along with Psalm 1, serves as an introduction to the whole book of Psalms, introducing the theme of the Lord's Messiah, the Lord's Anointed One. And it's pretty short. Why don't we just read the whole thing? Get one volunteer. Thank you, Mark.
Psalm 2. Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, You are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, and he will be angry, and your way, or he will be angry, and your way will be, and your way will lead to your destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him.
Okay, so what are some of the ways you see this psalm alluding to Jesus, to God's Son, the Anointed One, the Messiah? What does it tell us about him? Yeah, so he's called God's Son, and he inherits the nations. Anything else?
powerful.
Yeah, he's powerful. He's co-ruling with God. Anything else?
Last statement was for who take refuge.
Yeah, that's not talking about the Lord. That's talking about the Son. So that you take refuge in the Son just like you take refuge in the Lord. Because he is the Lord, of course. Anything else? Those would be the main thing. And we might notice the first couple verses talk about how the whole earth is really conspiring against the Son. So this is a psalm talking about God's Son, the Messiah, and talking about Jesus before he's born. And it's interesting that the book of Psalms is also a book of prophecy. We think of it mostly as poetry, but some of these psalms are really quite prophetic. Now let's turn to Psalm 95, because this is also going to be quoted. Or sorry, not 95, 110. Yeah, 95 was last week. And this is another psalm about the Messiah that would have been somewhat mysterious to the first audience, unless they understood it by inspiration. But Jesus quotes this. In fact, Psalm 110 is the most quoted passage from the Old Testament in the New Testament. It's quoted more than any other place in the Old Testament. And so let's go ahead and read that one. This one is talking about the Lord, and he doesn't use the word Messiah, but it basically is the Messiah and his anointed one, his co-ruling human, who is Jesus. So, any volunteer? Thank you, Anna.
The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on your day of battle, arrayed in holy splendor. Your young men will come to you, like dew from the morning's womb. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. He will drink from the brook along the way, and so he will lift his head high.
Okay. Hearing you read verse 5 just seemed incongruent. You're such a kind-hearted, sweet person and reading about heaping up the dead. But nevertheless, that is what the Messiah does. He does, part of being victorious is destroying all your enemies. So what does this tell us about the Messiah that maybe is in addition to the other psalm? He will definitely unleash his wrath on the enemies, but that was also in Psalm 2. Probably the key new bit of information is verse 4, where it says, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So the Messiah is going to be not only a ruling king with the Lord, but also a priest. He's going to represent the people before the Lord. Just like Melchizedek, a figure from Genesis, who was a priest king, who was not one of Abraham's children, but was outside of that system. He had his own city-state or something he was the leader of, and he was a priest and a king, and he served the Lord. And Psalm 10 is telling us the Messiah is going to be like that. He won't be from the tribe of Levi. He won't be a regular high priest, but he'll be his own type of priest-king who serves the Lord. So that's important to know because these are going to be quoted as we read about Jesus, our high priest. Now let's go ahead and read it. Let's do it kind of all in one sitting because it might be easier to not lose the forest for the trees. So let's read verses 14, chapter 4, 14 through 5:10. That's actually only about 15 verses. It's not really long. And then we'll look at what he's saying about Jesus. So back to Hebrews now. And if one of you wants to read again, you can, or you could pass it off if someone looks eager to take the baton. Yes, starting at 4:14 and then ending at 5:10.
Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest. But God said to him, "You are my son, today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and who was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there's kind of a lot in there, but let's unpack it. So in verses 14 through 16, he basically says that, well, what does he say about Jesus, who was our great high priest? He's comparing Jesus to the priest in the Old Testament, and he's not giving a lot of detail about the priest in the Old Testament. He's assuming we know what that person did. That's why I started with that review. But how does he compare Jesus now to the high priest in the Old Testament? Okay, yeah, that's so he was perfect, unlike the ancient high priests. Okay? And how is he similar to the high priest? Yeah. There's one other thing, I think I'll just mention it, and he can sympathize with us. Now, I guess the ancient high priest could sympathize too with the people because he was also sinful. But Jesus, though he's not sinful, he has felt all of our temptation, and he knows exactly what we're going through. And because we have a perfect high priest, the encouragement in 16 is let us approach the throne of grace with confidence. So let us go before him and be absolutely assured God is going to hear us. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. So because Jesus was the final high priest, he has opened the way. And so the curtain is no longer there. We can go right into the Holy of Holies. In a certain sense, we're kind of always there as we stand before God in worship of him, whatever we do, as we live our lives. So yeah, good point. Very important difference. Everything the Old Testament priest did was kind of anticipatory and setting up, but the barrier that Jesus then broke through. So he did what the ancient high priest was supposed to do, and he did it in a superior way, so now we have great confidence. And that would maybe be the best takeaway from this whole thing, is just remember the confidence you have before the Lord all the time. Every prayer you have, you're approaching a throne of grace, and you know you're going to find mercy in every time of need. Yep. Well, yeah, so what happened is, unfortunately, it became kind of a political institution as well. And it would be passed down from father to son and father to son. At the time of David, there was a switch because the previous one had been allied with Saul, and so now there's a new one. And then I think there's a switch later, but I forget exactly why that happens. And then at the time of the Maccabees, the high priests also became rulers. And so you had priest kings who were not of the proper line, and this was a big political problem. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. There's Caiaphas, and then his son-in-law. And Yeah, that's a good point. So they got to the point that they would be so, rich and powerful that they probably didn't sympathize with the common people. Even though they were sinful, it was hard for them to really relate to some poor person coming in, offering their little turtle dove or whatever. Good point. So Jesus actually can sympathize and does sympathize with you. And that's a nice thought too. Do you ever feel like nobody understands? No one gets what you're going through. Nobody really cares. People care a little, but they don't care as much as they could. Well, Jesus always does. He knows, and he does care. Yeah. 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 That's a good point. He said he went looking for the lepers and, the prostitutes, the people who were hurting, the people who were shunned. And so that's how he comes to us when we're hurting in whatever different way. It's a good encouragement there. So that verse is, I think, the most, applicable. The rest of this is all very good, though. It's explaining Jesus' role. Any other thoughts on those verses, or let's go on to chapter 5. So we read that already, but now let's look at some of these questions. Looking at verses about 1 to 3 in discussion question 1. The Old Testament high priest was given the honor of representing the people before God. Now, why was he able to deal gently with the people? Yeah, and so he understood. That's talking about verse 2. It says he's able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and going astray. Because he's also subject to weakness is the term, but same thing. Number 2, he could understand their weaknesses because he was weak. What did every high priest have to do for himself?
Sacrifice for his own sin.
Yeah. So that was part of the Day of Atonement. The high priest would have to atone for his own sins. And he'd have to do this other times as well. But on that day, they had made atonement even for the tabernacle. Now, question 3. In verses 8 and 9, the writer contrasts the Old Testament high priest with Jesus, and how was Jesus different? Here's another difference. Yeah, so he didn't need to make his own sacrifice. It's an interesting phrase there. Although he was a son, he learned obedience. What does that mean? How does that describe what Jesus did? Although he was the son, he learned obedience. Yeah. How was Jesus' obedience in his life? He said dying on the cross. How did he learn obedience? I mean, you'd think he's always obedient in a certain sense. He was never disobedient. He existed from eternity. Yet how did he learn obedience in his life on earth?
His human existence was a new thing for him.
Okay, yeah.
He wore flesh and blood and was tempted just like we are.
Yeah.
So he learned that's all now.
Yeah. So he learned human obedience. He'd never known that. And any aspects of that, how would that be different from just, or what were you going to say? Yeah, let this cup be taken, not my will, but your will. So we see that quite a bit. He learned to obey. Before he was on earth, he was in perfect harmony with God the Father, so he never disobeyed, but I don't know if do you obey someone when you're in perfect harmony with them and working in complete unity, or are you just working together? I don't know that he had to really obey in that he was never subject to any law before he became human. So obedience was something he learned after his incarnation, and like you said, he learned it from his suffering, and that made him perfect. Not that he wasn't perfect before, but it made him our perfect sacrifice and our perfect substitute. Before, he was perfect in and of himself, but now he is the perfect high priest, the perfect offering for our sin. All right, any thoughts on that question? try to move along. Question 4. Some Jews may have asserted that Jesus had no authority to lay claim to the high priesthood. In order to counter this, the writer quoted 2 Old Testament passages. In brief, what does each passage say about Jesus? So we just read the entire Psalms in our opening, now just looking at the first quote. So the quote, "You are my son, today I become your father," from Psalm 2. What's that telling us about Jesus? Yeah, he's the Son of God. He's been designated that way. Why does the writer quote this verse? What is he trying to? What point is he making? Yeah. So a priest can't just say, "Hey, I feel like being priest." You have to be from the right family, and you have to be appointed and designated. Otherwise, if you go into the Holy of Holies, you get killed, right? You have to be appointed. And he's pointing out Jesus was appointed because he was made God's son. In fact, made is not really the right word. He became. He is God's son. He was begotten as God's son. All right, so that's the first one. And the other Bible passage he quotes, and again, like he says, he's quoting this to prove to his audience that this all is part of the Old Testament, that Jesus isn't something new, but that he is fulfilling what was already there. So the point of the next quotation, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." Yeah. Okay, so he's going to reign forever. He's a new kind of priest. He's not just a temporary priest. Good point. Anything else? Why does he quote this passage? What is it telling us? Yeah, he's a priest eternally, and he's not from Levi, because he's going to be a priest and a king. So, and the reason he quotes this passage, interestingly, is mostly just to say that God anoints him and designated him. He didn't take this upon himself, and that would be important to us. I think to us it seems like kind of a subtle point to make. Why stress this? Jesus didn't just take this on himself. He was designated by God. I mean, we know Jesus is the Son of God. We've learned about the Trinity from our youth. But think to an early first century Jewish audience. They're living 10, 20 years after Jesus. They've heard all about him, and most of their community rejects him. They believe he's the Messiah, but they're questioning that. Why would it be important for them to stress that Jesus didn't just decide one day, "I'm the Messiah," but that God chose and anointed and designated him? Why would that be such an important point for that audience?
The Bible that they had was the Old Testament. So their book, their Old Testament, pointed exactly to Jesus, and the writer of Hebrews is pointing out. Your writings actually indicate that Jesus is.
Yeah. They needed to see that it was from Scripture. It was prophesied. It was not just something else. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's going to give them the evidence and show it to them. And he's quoting 2 very important Psalms. Any other thoughts why it was important, especially for them, to make this point? That Jesus did not appoint himself, God appointed him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they needed to see how because those things were still going on in their day. There was still a temple, and they thought that was really interesting, and there was all this angel worship and stuff that was getting popular. And so it wasn't for them just stuff in the Bible, but it was also stuff in their life, in their world, that was still contemporary. Good point.
You mentioned it earlier, and I think the point we see in the other letters, he is king, not from the legal family.
Yeah.
King and priest.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to be divided from that group of people
Yes, yeah. Because he wasn't a priest. So, and there were lots of priests in their community. You know the last name Cohen? You heard of the Cohen brothers, or, this or that guy Cohen? The word Cohen means priest, And just like today, they had lots of people whose last name was priest in Greek or whatever language they spoke. And so they would say, what do you mean he's a priest? He's not a priest. The only priests are from Levi. We would know if he was a priest. He would have his papers if he was a priest. And so he could point to this and say, look, Melchizedek was a priest, and he was also a king. He wasn't from the line of Levi, but God said that the Messiah would be that kind of priest. So yeah, very important point for them. For us, we just take it for granted because we already know it. But it helps us appreciate this book, why it's written, why he's making the points he is making. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That would have meant a lot to them because they're very about the honor, the shame, the respect. And so the fact that Abraham actually respected Melchizedek, I think later or is that in another book where it talks about Abraham actually gave a tithe to Melchizedek. And so in a certain sense, he tithes to him. I forget where that's coming. Just saw it recently. But it'll be coming up soon, this book or another one. So any other thoughts? All good points here. I was reminded in Texas, you have to wait longer than you think when you ask a question. You have to pause. You have to wait till it's painfully quiet, and you still have to push on. So any other points? Yeah. Huh? Yeah, right. So it's not just that it's, instead of it's not like it's an option, but that priesthood, like Jesus' priesthood, is better. And that would have been good because they got priests down the street who were saying, come to us and we'll tell you if you're clean and what kind of sacrifices to make. Okay, good. Good thoughts. Any others? Or we got more questions. 5, Jewish antagonists claim that God would never listen to a sinner and that Jesus was just that. I mean, that might be a bit of a painting with a broad brush, but yeah, I mean, they understood people sinned and were forgiven, but they believed that you had to go through the right rituals and everything to be forgiven, and you had to amend your life. That's true. The Pharisees were that way. They also claimed that Jesus' sufferings proved he was a sinner rejected by God. Now that was a common argument, and even in the Talmud and stuff, that's still an argument Jews use. If he was the Messiah, he would not have suffered that way. That's actually written in the Talmud, basically. The fact that he was convicted as a criminal shows he couldn't be the Messiah. So why did God listen to Jesus? And it's found in this last paragraph. Yeah. So because of his reverent submission. What's that referring to? Okay, so ultimately his giving his life and everything leading up to that. And when it says he was heard, what do you think it means? How was he heard? Which prayers of his were heard? Okay. True, every prayer he made. What are some of the things we know he prayed about? Yeah. So he prayed for his apostles, for his disciples we're going to look at this in a couple weeks, so I've just been looking it over. It's not fair, but John 17, it's his high priestly prayer. And he prays that his disciples would be kept firm and that they would grow and that many more would be gathered, to his flock. Sheep from other sheepfolds would be brought in and that they would all be one. in the faith, that they would be preserved, that they would be protected and kept, and all these things. So his whole life, we probably gloss over those more than we should, but when he's praying for us and for the church, it's a really important thing, and all of those prayers are being heard, and each one of them, we can read them really as a promise. You know, when we pray, we always think, well, God could answer yes, but he could answer no, I have something better. But when Jesus prays for the church, God's answer is never, no, I have something better. His answer is yes. And so all of those prayers Jesus prayed for us are heard, and so we read them really as more promises to us. So anyway, yeah, that's why he heard him, because he was completely obedient and submissive, and to the point of death. All right, and then what made Jesus a pure and spotless sacrifice there? Question 5. The end of question 5. Yeah. Today in Revelation, we'll see, the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd. So he became the Lamb, and then that Lamb is now shepherding us. Any other thoughts? What made Jesus a pure and spotless sacrifice? Yeah. So he was absolutely perfect. Sometimes in catechism, we talk about his active obedience and his passive obedience. Let's see, Leah's in catechism. Laura just graduated. Oh, Elizabeth is in catechism. Siri and Anna have finished catechism within the last few years. Who remembers the distinction between Jesus' active and passive obedience? Anybody? Yeah. So do you know the difference between the words active and passive here? Active means you are kind of busy doing something, and passive means you are experiencing something. Something is being done to you. You're not out there doing something, you're just receiving on the receiving end. So in his active obedience, I guess actually we haven't covered this year in catechism, so to be fair for Leah and Elizabeth. It's not, yeah, but Laura, Siri, I'm just saying, okay. Yeah. Well, when we were driving in the car with Kendra and Laura, I started doing catechism review at the beginning of the year, and they did not think that was cool. But now it's time. All right. So active obedience is his perfect life that he lived, strenuously obeying God's law, busily just living, but always obedient to the Lord. And he did that to become the perfect, spotless lamb. His passive obedience is then when he offers his life on the cross. Thanks to his active obedience, he is that perfect sacrifice, but now the sacrifice still has to be made, and so that is the passive obedience. Yeah, but it's just, why do we have this distinction? Why do we teach these terms that are then immediately forgotten? It's because we want to stress that his whole life is an offering, in a sense. Not just what he did on the cross, but everything up until that point is preparing him to be the perfect sacrifice. And so his whole life is lived for you and for me. Not just what he did, but every moment, really from his conception, is in our place and for our sake. So that's why we teach the active and passive obedience of Christ. Let's see. We can look at the apply question. Discuss how Roman Catholics use Mary, the priest. It's almost just kind of stating the conclusion, but how Roman Catholics use Mary, the priesthood, the papacy, and saints to lead people away from going directly to the Father through Jesus. Any thoughts on that? They do. Anyone have experience with that? Yeah, right. And if you're trying to cover all the bases, what does that say about Jesus? Yeah. Yeah, exactly, right. So I shouldn't mention who, but I was talking to someone who grew up Catholic, and they were telling me, yeah, I generally liked what we did in church, but it always did strike me as weird that we'd pray to Mary, because if you go to Jesus, why would you go to Mary? If you have Jesus, it seems weird to go to someone else instead of going to him. So I was glad that she came away with the right understanding of Jesus. But yeah, you think if you're teaching some kid, oh, well, you can pray to him, then you'd think, well, I only pray to Jesus on special occasions or something. Yeah, Carl. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. You want to hand him the microphone, or if you have it close by, thanks. Sorry, just for the sake of anybody listening. Oh, okay.
Jesus Christ.
Now it's on.
As the only way to salvation. And we could have, I was glad that all those people there were hearing that. That was the first half of the sermon.
Yeah.
And then he got into praying for the dead and all these other things that they really have a lot of confusion on.
Sure, yeah.
It's interesting to me that the first half of it was right down the line.
Good point. I had the same experience. I went to a Catholic funeral, and the first half of it was great. And then they throw in all the bad stuff at the end, too, so they kind of give you the gospel and then they take it away. Because the gospel is talking about how they're forgiven and they're accepted with Christ and they're in heaven, and then you pray that they can get out of purgatory. And you ask Mary and the saints to bless them. And it just totally destroys it. Same thing on Catholic radio, by the way. The other day I heard an excellent speaker on Catholic radio. Just could have been a Wells pastor or some Protestant pastor. He understood the gospel really, really well. And then he talked about Mary at the end, and just contradictory, but too bad.
Lamb Catholic aunt, who is one of many Catholics who thinks of Mary as co-redemptress.
Co-redemptress, so that's taking it to another level.
Yes.
Yeah, so that she somehow has a part in redeeming us.
Yes.
Wow. And what were you going to say, Nathan?
Yeah, so the Catholics, they have, they call them priests and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of taking the baseball analogy a little further, instead of trying to cover all the bases, why don't you just get up there, hit a home run, go straight to home plate, pray to your high priest, Lord Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. So good point. Baseball analogy. You don't need to what? Go base by base or what? You just do a home run and you get right there.
Yeah.
And so good point. It's just unnecessarily muddling things. And not just unnecessarily, sinfully and evilly, because it's idolatry. Because anybody who's praying to Mary, they're doing one of two things. As far as I can consider, it's either idolatry or it's necromancy. Either you think that she is divine in some way, that she has some divine power, and that would be idolatry, that's treating her as a god. Or they'll say, well, if you push them on it, this isn't how it sounds to me when you hear the prayers, but they'll say, well, we know that we're not actually praying to her. We're just going to her for aid, and then she will go to Jesus for us. But even then, it's necromancy, because you're talking to the dead. That's forbidden in the Bible. You don't conjure up spirits. You don't speak to dead people. So they have taken the worst, most horrible occult practices and just put them square right in the middle of their worship service, along with Jesus. And then they get so used to it, they can't see how wrong it is. So it's too bad, and that most, there probably are a lot of believers in the Catholic Church, but there's also a lot of people who are probably confused and led away from the true faith. Because the gospel is there, and yet all these lies are right alongside it. And speaking of the Old Testament, that's how it was in the Old Testament too. They worshiped Yahweh, and they worshiped Baal. They'd worship the Lord, and they'd worship Asherah. And the people couldn't see why this was a problem. They're like, well, we're worshiping the Lord, Well, yeah, but you're not following all the rules he gave you, and you're adding all these other rules. But it's just when you're in a system like that, it's very hard to see. So, okay, interesting application question. And I think we should probably cut it there. So I thought we'd get further, but a lot of stuff to unpack and a lot of good comments from the pews. So thank you for that. And next time we'll just pick up with this warning against falling away, and probably get further than 6:3, but we'll see. So, all right. And for those who came after, Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. Thank you for leading your family here on Mother's Day.